All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our final video of the purchasing class. This video is going to encompass all of chapters 1 through 8 and give you exactly what you need to know for your certification exam. So please make sure that you can follow everything we're about to cover. If anything is unclear to you, please make an appointment to see me prior to taking the exam. So we're gonna go in order of the chapters. So starting with chapter 1, one of the key learning outcomes from Chapter 1 was our 5 objectives of purchasing. I taught it as the 5 R's. We need to get the right product at the right price from the right source in the right amount at the right time. And this, you'll see, is a continuous cycle. This is not a one and done process. It needs to repeat itself. So after we discussed the five R's, we talked about two main purchasing systems, centralized and decentralized. Decentralized purchasing is what you commonly see in small to medium-sized operations. And that's where the owner or the general manager will give authority to the various department heads to do their own purchasing. And then pending their approval. If an order is over a certain amount, say about $1,000, it would have to be approved by an owner or a GM. This is in contrast to centralized purchasing, which is a little bit more of a complex system, but it's necessary in our large organizations. So this looks very complicated, but what you're seeing on these lines is the paper trail, or what we defined in Chapter 8 as an audit trail. So how this works is your kitchen personnel will issue purchase requisitions that'll go to your receiving and storing folks. They'll add any additional quantities needed, completing the requisition. That goes to the purchasing director. The purchasing director will then either do a request for proposal for vendors, or if they already know the price and they're happy with it, they will go ahead and do a purchase order, making sure to send that purchase order to the vendor, but then always a copy of the purchase order and the delivery invoice needs to go to the accounting department. For some of you, you might not have an entire accounting department. You might just have one bookkeeper or one accountant. It needs to go to that person. Or sometimes your purchasing director might also be the person who actually pays the invoices. So make sure that all goes to them. From there, we talked about a job description versus a job specification, which is getting at the skills and the tasks needed to be a purchaser. Remember, with specification, it's very easy to get these two concepts mixed up, and the exam will try to trick you. A specification is specific skills. Think of your 3 S's. So a specific skill needed would be communication skills or organizational skills. A job description will talk about tasks. For example, in here you'll see identifying potential vendors. That's a task, not a skill. Also, expediting delivery of products. Again, a task, not a skill. Make sure to clearly understand that differentiation. And those are your key takeaways from Chapter 1. Moving right along into Chapter 2. One of the things that we harped on, which I know so many of you greatly enjoyed, were our product specifications. So with our product specifications, we need to learn a lot of different information. So first and foremost, we talk about a product name. In my example, we're talking about beef, but more specifically a filet mignon. In our operation, we have a lot of different product specifications, so it's important that we number them sequentially. You want to put what the menu item name is, and this is really key, the product's intended use. Because understanding how we're going to use the product will help inform us in what type of market form or packaging we want to order it in. And then we'll give a general product description. This helps our receiving staff check for quality. A filet mignon we want round and thick. If we get in something claiming to be a filet mignon and it's this thin, long piece of steak, it's probably not filet mignon, and we'd want to reject that. So the specific information, we always need to give the count and the portion size. In this case, I want a 50 count of 8-ounce steaks. If you have a specific grade, like a USDA grade that you want, that should always be stated on the sheet. You want to give the weight, and this is the total weight for the order, not the weight of each individual portion. Talk about the variety, style, type, and color. Again, this is more for the receiving staff to understand what they're looking for. And then very important is the market form. So in this case, I want them individually portioned. I don't want a big slab of filet mignon coming in that I then have to butcher. Some of you might want to do that, but that's a strategic trade-off in labor cost versus food cost. And then packaging requirements, again, wrapped individually, and here I specified that I want them vacuum sealed to maintain freshness. And then again, your purchase unit size is kind of the same as your total weight. If you want a particular place of origin, specify it, otherwise just take wherever it comes from. Temperature control procedures, this is all based off serve-safe temperature ranges, which I've given you handouts on, so I'm not going to go through that here. If you have acceptable substitutes, make sure to put it in. And then your inspection procedures should be specified. In the case of a filet mignon, I would want to see the proper level of marbling, and I'd want to make sure that there's no discoloration or blemishes present on my product. Otherwise, I'm going to reject that product because that's indicative of a quality failure. And then if there's any other miscellaneous requirements, for example, I would want my receiving staff, if I was the purchasing director, to weigh at least 2 of the steaks, if not more, to ensure that the vendor hasn't shorted me on weight, because that's a common issue as we've discussed in Chapter 8 with receiving. Okay. So that's your overview of a product specification. Make sure to understand not only the purpose of a product specification, but what's on it. So when we implement a product specification, this is our 9-step process. And notice that we have this neat little arrow that takes us back to the top. And this is because specifications have to be continually reevaluated, especially with seasonality and as menu items change. So step 1 is to determine our needed products. Then we have to learn about the available products, and that's where we might use a request for information as opposed to an RFP. We need to match the specifications with the products. We need to determine which option meets our needs the best, complete a draft of our product specification form, and then this piece right here, request advice from the production staff. If all you do is purchase 40 hours a week, you're not actually working with the food. You want to talk to the people on the front lines who are using the food. Often they have insights that are quite valuable for people. And then we want to revise our specification as needed, and this could be based off vendor shortages or seasonality concerns. And then we're going to send this specification to our potential vendors to make sure they can meet our needs. And lastly, when receiving our products, we're going to compare that to our product specification to make sure that our quality standards have been met. And some key terms that I want to highlight from Chapter 2. We spent a painfully long time on make-or-buy analysis, as you all remember. A make-or-buy analysis is when we're trying to decide, are we going to prepare something on-site from scratch, kind of that old-school approach, or are we going to buy it either partially or fully processed? Keep in mind, even if something is only partially processed, it is still considered a convenience item, and you will have a degree of higher food cost in there. But what you have to do is balance that against your labor cost savings and your operational efficiency and decide what's best for your kitchen. A signature dish is a menu item that customers associate with a specific operation. So that's a bit of a marketing strategy where purchasing and marketing come together. We talked about IQF, individually quick frozen items. So this is where food is blast frozen in individual pieces before packaging. You typically see this used with fish and fruit, but it can be used with other items. The point of this is preservation, and it will give you a better shelf life on your food. And then lastly, a stockout. A stockout is a situation that occurs when an item is no longer available in inventory. So a stockout is a perfect example of when we might have to reevaluate our product specifications because we're not going to be able to get the exact thing that we want. So those are your key takeaways from Chapter 2. In Chapter 3, we talked about various purchasing systems and their impacts. So I want to start off. We talked about the evils and dangers of purchasing excessive quantities. The big one is negative impacts on cash flow. If you remember in class, we did an example where I took money out of my wallet and we passed it around, and we saw how quickly my wallet became empty when I bought too much food. We want to avoid that. We also have limited flexibility, and that's largely because of the negative impacts on cash flow. And then we have limitations on our storage space. A cooler is only so large. Our dry storage area can only accommodate so much. And also, for coolers and freezers to work at optimal efficiency, they can't be overcrowded. So you need to keep that in mind. Also, there's an increased risk of employee theft. More product in our coolers and in our establishment could give greater opportunity of theft if they're not controlled properly. And then your quality of perishable products can decrease. If you buy produce 2 weeks ahead of time, it's not going to hold for you in most cases. So make sure to keep these in mind and purchase the proper quantities. And then we briefly talked about just-in-time inventory. Just-in-time inventory is kind of a new, innovative approach to purchasing. And this table illustrates for you the differences between traditional purchasing and JIT purchasing. JIT purchasing, in a nutshell, is a system where a purchaser has a long-term commitment with a vendor that allows them to make more frequent deliveries. I would advise JIT purchasing if you're in an operation where you need stuff every day or every other day, either because of your size or because of freshness or quality requirements, because most vendors will not deliver to you multiple times a week. So that's where you would want to use that. JIT requires, it's more innovative, there's less time spent on purchasing activities. However, purchaser-vendor commitment is critical, as is communication. We've discussed the importance of win-win collaborations with our vendors. That's critically important in a JIT system. The other system that we talked a lot about is the par level inventory system. Par levels are one of the most commonly used systems in our industry. And it's a system where we have a specified amount of products that should always be in inventory. So in class, you guys did some worksheets on various par levels. So for example, we looked at one of our items, Sam Adams Boston Lager. We have a par level of 50. We have 30 cases available. However, we're going to use up 20 cases before delivery. So as you can see from the math below, we're only going to have 10 cases left by the time of delivery. So that means if our par is 50, we need to order 40 cases. And then you can see how the math works for the rest of these examples. I would encourage you to go back to this worksheet and redo the problem to really understand how to calculate your par levels. Now, modern technology has made it so we don't always have to do this by hand. Oftentimes this can be done in a point of sale system, but to understand the concept, it would be good for you to try it by hand. Another key part of Chapter 3 was sales forecasting. We talked about multiple different methods for forecasting, and it is a rather imprecise science to a certain degree. It is a lot of estimation, but it is an important activity to engage in. So this example is from your textbook here. Most point-of-sale systems will give you a 2-week sales report. They'll show you they'll go by menu item and tell you how many you've sold in the previous 2 weeks, culminating in total sales. What you want to do with that is calculate what percentage of total sales that item made up of. So to calculate that, for example, with the shrimp plate, you would take 201, divide it by the total of 471, multiply it by 100, and you'd see that that's approximately 42.7% of total sales. You would do the same thing for the rest of them. You can take those percentages and then more accurately forecast over the next 2 weeks how much of each plate you're going to sell. And then based off your standardized recipes for those items, you would have a more clear picture of what it is you need to order. And this kind of makes use of our menu item popularity index, because we have to understand that what percentage of customers are likely to order a specific menu item. Some items are more popular than others. And then lastly, we always want to study our sales history. We might want to look further back than 2 weeks in some cases. The other thing to keep in mind is, are there any special events in your area and seasonality? Because I wouldn't want to take a 2-week sales report from January here in Rochester and use it to forecast 2 weeks of sales in June, because that's an apples and oranges comparison. So pay attention to your time windows that you're doing. So that's everything that I want to highlight from Chapter 3. Getting into Chapter 4, we spent most of our time in Chapter 4 talking about vendor selection criteria and vendor sourcing. A quick little factoid that I wanted to start with. There's 3 agencies that can inspect vendor procedures and vendor facilities at will. That's the FDA, the USDA, and OSHA. They all look for different things, but they are all entitled to do inspections. So, vendor selection criteria. You guys did one of these vendor rating forms in an in-class activity. We want to look for factors such as service procedures, any type of technology applications, product availability, experience of the vendors, all of these types of important factors that are going to impact how well we work with a vendor. We also want to look at payment terms. Payment terms are huge. Do they give us a week to pay, 30 days to pay? Is it cash on delivery or COD? These are all key factors. So make sure that you consider that very carefully. With all of that being said, the most valuable factor in vendor sourcing and evaluation is previous experience with the vendor. History tends to repeat itself. So if you have previous experience with the vendor or someone in your operation does, take that under due consideration very carefully. So some of our different types of vendors. We have our broadline vendors, a vendor that offers a wide variety of products. This is your US Foods, your Cisco, people like that, where you could order produce, dry goods, dairy, all from one place. Then we also have our specialty line vendors, which is a vendor that offers a deep selection of relatively few products. In class, we talked about ordering dairy from Pittsford Dairy. That would be a specialty line vendor. If you think back to ServSafe, our Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, HACCP, it's a system used to control risks and hazards throughout the food supply process. A lot of this is managed through purchasing procedures. And then a qualified buyer. This is a person with the authority to make purchase decisions for his or her organization. It could be blanket authority, it could be authority up to a certain limit. But when a person is a qualified buyer, they are acting as an agent of the operation, which means that any deal they enter into is a binding contract. And then lastly, our actual definition of vendor sourcing is decisions that determine which vendors will be asked to quote prices for needed products. We're not going to go through vendor sourcing for someone who's already an approved vendor. This is when we're trying to bring in new vendors to the operation. And then the last concept from Chapter 4 that we discussed a little bit is this concept of an NBG, a national buying group. A national buying group you're not going to see in your small restaurants, your mom and pop businesses, etc. What you're going to see with an NBG, it's very commonly used in franchises because national buying groups can get tremendously good unit prices. I also in class refer to this as economies of scale. So how this works is your local restaurant or food service unit, say this is McDonald's, will talk to the local distributor will talk to the national buying group. The NBG will source everything and then it will be delivered to you. It is a complex system, but it does result in a large amount of cost savings. So those are our main highlights from Chapter 4. Okay, entering into our key points from Chapter 5. Chapter 5 was all about how to do pricing, and I know you guys had oh so much fun with the pricing mathematics. But happy news, I'm only going to go over one of the approaches, not the other 5 that I taught you in the classroom. The main common approach is the multiplier approach. So you'll recognize this table from our in-class handout. So I'm going to go through the first example. So say we have a hamburger on our menu. Our desired food cost percentage is 20%. We're being ambitious. Our product cost is $2.25. So that means that our multiplier is 5. And that what we would do is we would take the multiplier of 5, multiply that by our product cost, gives us our selling price of $11.25. Where this multiplier comes from is we take our food cost percentage and we do 100% divided by the food cost percentage. So 100 divided by 20 gives us the multiplier of 5. You would go through and do the same thing for the rest of these. And then you always want to track your averages. Where's your average food cost? Where's your average product cost? So on and so forth. Again, this is the old school way of doing it. There are technology applications that can do this for you. So then we get into something a little controversial. I know we had some fun debates about this in class, this idea of differential pricing, charging different customers different prices for the same product. So an example of this is giving a discount for purchasing larger quantities. This is known as a quantity discount. Some of you thought that this was an unfair practice. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with you, but this is industry standard. Vendors do differential pricing all the time for a variety of reasons. You can have customer status discounts, quantity discounts, promotional discounts. These are all differential pricing strategies. And then I talked about a free market. So most of you, if you're working in a private sector business, you're in a free market situation. So the prices that you pay for products and services are determined between you and the vendor, whatever deal that you strike. For those of us who work in public food service, this is not necessarily the case because there's things like governmental contracts and regulations. You've heard me complain about that before, so I won't do it on the video. Now, there's also something called a rebate. A rebate is different from a discount because a discount comes off the price before we actually pay for it. A rebate, we have to pay full price and then wait to get reimbursed from the rebate. So think of a rebate as a reimbursement. It's a deduction offered after a purchase has been made. Sometimes it's called a cashback offer because it sounds more attractive than a rebate. And remember, rebates are often used to increase awareness of existing products. They're used to entice purchasers to maybe try a product that they haven't used before. And then this idea of value perception. This is the customer's opinion of a product's value to him or her. Okay? It's very hard for us to control value perception because we haven't mastered the art of mind control on our customers. But we want to keep in mind how they're perceiving us. And then we talked about negotiation in this chapter. Mr. Pat Bates did a great job covering this, so I'm not going to do too much of it here. But we want to talk about our different positions. We first have our going-in position. This is like our number one desired outcome. It's a position that prioritizes desired outcomes from a negotiation session. It's what I really want. Now, as is true in life, we tend to not always get what we really want, which is where a fallback position comes in. A fallback position is an alternative position that might not be our first choice, but it's one that we find acceptable. And that's the idea, if you think back to where I talked about product specifications in Chapter 2, that's why we have acceptable substitutes listed sometimes, because it's an alternative product that meets our needs. And then lastly, with discounts, this last little point, you need enough storage space to take advantage of quantity discounts. If you want to buy a 50-pound case of ground beef instead of 25 pounds to take advantage of a discount, that might be smart business. But if your freezer can't accommodate that, you're just going to end up having it all perish. So it's not always smart to take advantage of those discounts. Okay, getting into Chapter 6, we had a lot of fun talking about contracts. So you'll recognize this handout. This is the handout I gave in class about all of the different contract provisions. What I've done for you guys is I've highlighted the ones that are the most important. I'm not saying you shouldn't be aware of the others, but the highlighted ones are the ones you really want to commit to memory. So this idea of acceptance. Acceptance is an agreement to the exact details of an offer. If you deviate even slightly, that's not acceptance. What that becomes is a counteroffer. Okay? It has to be to the exact down-to-the-penny details of the contract. Consideration refers to the payment to be made in exchange for the promises in the contract. So consideration is usually monetary. A contract in and of itself is a legally enforceable agreement promise. So once an agreement has been made and signed off upon, it becomes a contract. The idea of something being enforceable is a contract that can be recognized as valid by the courts. And that means that if somebody decides, hey, I don't want to comply, not so much, that's not going to happen, because the court can force you to comply with the contract. And then lastly, an offer is a proposal to perform an act or to pay an amount for something. If an offer is accepted, it becomes a valid contract. The rest of these things refer to clauses that are common in vendor contracts. We pretty well in class, so I'm going to leave it to you guys to figure this out. The last thing I'll highlight, remember, trade-outs are different from consideration. Consideration is monetary. A trade-out is basically a barter. Another point worth highlighting is the competitive bidding process. We've talked about this in terms of ethics. Competitive bidding reduces the likelihood of any type of ethical violation occurring, particularly favoritism. So competitive bidding is when you send RFPs to multiple approved vendors, and the goal is to ensure that you're paying a reasonable price. The other goal is to maintain ethical procedures. So keep that in mind as well. A point that I didn't highlight in class, but that is in your textbook, there's a term called a problem account. This is used by vendors. Vendors call somebody a problem account when they have a negative view of a purchaser because they call up with frequent emergencies or change their orders all the time and usually do last-minute changes. If you're viewed as a problem account, the level of service you get from a vendor is going to start decreasing exponentially. So we talked about a purchase requisition. This is a sample of a very basic purchase requisition. Our item, our purchase unit, so are we buying it by the ounce, by the pound, by the each, the number that we need, do we need 5 cases, 1 case, 3 each, and then the specification number it correlates with, and then somebody will authorize it. Purchase requisitions can be more complicated than this, but they don't necessarily need to be. These are all your required elements. Some key terms from the chapter that you're going to want to remember. Expediting. This is not like expediting in the kitchen. This expediting refers to any activity or action we take to speed up the delivery of products that have been ordered but not yet received. Purchase requisition, the textbook definition, is a document used to inform the purchasing staff that more products need to be ordered. And that's commonly used in your larger operations. And then, like I mentioned before, a trade-out is an agreement between 2 businesses in which the consideration is not money. It's a very fancy way of saying bartering. And you had a homework assignment based upon that, so refer back to that homework assignment. And then lastly, keep in mind, purchasers can assure that vendors meet quality needs by carefully checking incoming products in the receiving process and rejecting anything that do not meet standards. This is why purchasing and receiving are so intertwined. All right, moving right along into Chapter 7. Chapter 7 was our ethics chapter. We talked about a lot of different ethical violations. However, the most serious ethical violation is kickbacks. Kickbacks are not only unethical, but they're illegal in most states. Most companies have a code of purchasing ethics, which are guidelines that should be followed as purchasers implement procedures and make decisions. Its purpose is to explain ethical behavior and policies. Typically, here's a sample code from your textbook. Typically, people who have purchasing authority will be required to read through and sign off on one of these when they are first hired. And again, the purpose of this is to create a paper trail. So if they violate this, they can't claim that, oh, they can't do the ignorance claim. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do this. Well, yes, you did. Your signature's right there. So you want to make sure you're always in compliance with these purchasing ethics. Underneath, some key terms here. A kickback, by definition, is money or a gift that's received by an employee in return for purchasing from a specific vendor. Again, highly unethical. Your decision should be impartial. Reciprocity. Reciprocity is our tit-for-tat situation. A purchaser agrees to buy something from a vendor in return for some other kind of business from that vendor. That's your stereotypical tit-for-tat situation. Then lastly, a statement of business conduct. Not all businesses have this, but it's becoming more common. It's a broad code of behavior that will address many aspects of the business and its employees who have a wide variety of responsibilities. It basically says this is what's acceptable conduct, this is what isn't. And then we also discussed steward sales. Steward sales is when companies have their employees buy products off of them, buy products off the establishment for their personal use. That is technically unethical. Now, we've talked a lot about what is unethical, so now it's time to talk about what is ethical. We have 7 guidelines for ethical behavior. This is your checklist to help you make ethical decisions. Ask yourself these 7 questions. Is it legally permitted? Does it follow the company policy or code? Does it harm anyone? Is it fair and truthful? Would I care if it happened to me? Will I tell others about it? And what if every person did the same thing? You want to go through these in this order. If you ask question 1, is it legally permitted, and the answer is no, you're done. You're just not doing it. Okay? But if the answer is that it is legally permitted, keep going down through the 7 and use that as your checklist. The last thing I want to highlight from this chapter is this idea of backdoor selling. Backdoor selling is when a vendor's representative tries to influence a production employee without permission from the purchaser. In general, the vendor representative, also called a distributor sales rep, a DSR, should only be speaking to people with purchasing authority. They should not be influencing other employees. So that is the end of our key terms from Chapter 7, and we will address Chapter 8 momentarily.
Hello everyone, and to wrap up Chapter 8, the main function of purchasing is checking and accepting refusing deliveries of items. Very important function of the operation. The most important part of receiving is actually confirming the quality. This is especially important with produce. It's difficult to maintain quality with fresh product. Product ownership is transferred once the invoice is signed. So one of the most important steps in receiving is checking that product when it's delivered and not signing that invoice until you confirmed it's what you actually want. Refrigerated foods must be received at 41 degrees or below, so it's important to have a thermometer on hand to ensure that you're properly inspecting the products and they're coming in at the appropriate temperatures. Products should be stored at shoulder height or lower for accessibility purposes once you put that away. Receiving area must be equipped with pallets, hand carts, scales, and thermometers. So there's where that thermometer comes in, and the scale for actually weighing your meats and your products to ensure that they're actually what they're supposed to be. And then here is a chart of the receiving process. Step 1, compare delivery invoice with that purchase order. So you want to make sure that what you ordered is actually what you're getting. Check your product quality, weight, and count. Step 2, confirm product quality. Step 3 is actually signing the invoice once you confirm everything. And then issue a credit memo and move your product to the storage area. And this will complete the receiving report. So it's critically important to always compare the invoice to the purchase order. A couple notes here as well. A pallet is a portable platform or rack typically made of wooden slats. Petty cash fund is often just funds you have on hand to go purchase small purchases, not used for larger planned purchases, but it's something you need last minute essentially. And then receiving, we just talked about a series of activities that ends with the transfer of product ownership from the vendor to the restaurant operation. And then here is a chart of information that Mr. Redlow and I just reviewed as well.